The wonderful RPG of Baldur's Gate 3 fell into a little bit of drama this week with the deployment, undeployment, and redeployment of Hotfix 4. In this video, we'll talk a bit about that and broader reflections, as well as some insights into the first proper patch and how they're changing their hotfix and patching process moving forward to make sure that issues like this don't happen again, before finally quickly touching on Baldur's Gate 3 on console, the PlayStation 5 version. The gameplay in the background is when I first met my dear Australian friend, but putting that to one side, because it will be for much of the video we'll be looking at things, let's jump straight in and talk about Hotfix 4, the dilemma that was. And to Larian Studios' credit, they tidied it up very quickly. As you can see, within about 20 hours after Hotfix 4 went live, it was taken down and then redeployed, and that all happened within the period of a day. And if you take a look at this notice, you can see why this is still an important problem though. They rolled back Hotfix 4, and if you'd saved since updating to it, you wouldn't be able to load those saves until they republish Hotfix 4. Yes, of course, you can keep playing on the old hotfix, but you have to play with old saves. So there's a save compatibility issue here that potentially means a significant but not overwhelming number of players had made progress and then kind of just been left waiting around, fearing that, of course, they didn't want to have to replay it all for it to be fixed in no time, and of course it was. And now, rightly, you might be wondering what was actually in it, and much like the other hotfixes, as you can see, not a lot, although granted the last one, this one that you're looking at right now, the third, was pretty significant. But of course they all share one thing in common, it's about fixing bugs. It's about making things work better, most notably players won't get stuck in mid to long rest due to companions not waking up anymore, and a variety of other things, of course, have been changed. Like, as we discussed last week, the enabling of cross-saves ahead of PS5 launch, something we'll talk about in a bit more detail towards the end of the video. Last week, or about 6 days ago, we also picked through the hotfixes, pulled out any key things, and discussed the community update, which, in case you missed it, just to touch on it quickly, the 15 seconds too long, didn't read. And some of my key highlights were firstly that most of you really loved Paladin, Sorcerer a follow-up, and then every other class except for Cleric. Sorry, Shadowheart, fairly consistent. And then in terms of race choices, as one final other thing I would note, and this really is a shout out to our poor Short Kings, who are vastly not preferred. Instead, we prefer to be humans or elves, as it turns out. Just some fun statistics that they shared, while they also shared that, by the way, Baldur's Gate 3 still hitting record player numbers at around 875,000 people now last weekend. I'll be interested to see if that continues this weekend after, of course, a bit of a dip in player count this week, given some dramas recently with Hotfix 4, and maybe interest will start to wane over time now too. We'll have to wait and see. Let's now focus our attention back in on this, the statement that was released today around Hotfix 4's redeployment. In it, they say that they had to roll it back because of a rare compiler issue, and they're going to change the way that they do patches moving forward to try and make sure that a situation like this doesn't happen again. And as we mentioned earlier, they say that players who had downloaded Hotfix 4 were unable to continue from their Hotfix 4 saves once we rolled back the patch. I was quite taken with their fairly open and modest tone throughout this messaging, and I'd be really interested to know if you felt the same way. I reckon you probably do. They say, and they sort of move on to really address it more specifically. The situation is remedied now with the re-release of Hotfix 4, but we recognize the frustration caused by this and want to apologize, and that's why we're changing things up. They move on to say that Hotfix 4 went through a rigorous QA pipeline and was confirmed as a candidate for release yesterday. However, they triggered a rebuild of it, relatively last minute, to change the version number. The version number that was cooked was unfortunately plagued by the compiler corruption, which was causing certain exceptions that normally wouldn't cause crashes to, you guessed it, cause the game to crash. They move on to continue to say that these issues are extremely rare. They weren't prepared for it, they should have been, and they messed up. They were, as we discussed, able to fix it in around 20 hours. They share a little bit of detail on that the teams worked overnight in Europe, as well as teams in Canada and Malaysia to diagnose what went wrong so they could redeploy a fix. And more importantly, to avoid this happening in future. Quote, "We'll make sure that any change made to future version candidates, no matter how small or innocuous, will always go through our full and comprehensive QA pipeline, which include a global in-house QA team, automated testing, unit tests, and save game compatibility testing. So I think overall, the message there, fairly modest, as I say, fairly humble. Every patch that they plan to push through now will go through more testing. Maybe that makes them just slightly slower, but I think, of course, that'll be worthwhile to ensure that you're not left a day, heaven forbid, without playing Baldur's Gate 3. Now let's move on to talking about patch 1, not hotfixes, but an actual game update, a patch. And the most recent news comes from a tweet that was retweeted, or an X that was X'd again. My ex, I don't know. Either way, by Larian Studios, enthused about our feedback, very rewarding. They say that their current roadmap is A, Hotfix 4, which we've already seen. B is patch 1, with over 1,000 fixes and tweaks. And then C will be patch number 2. Okay, so we have kind of a rough idea about what we're dealing with. We're up to that B part, of course, which will be patch 1. Exciting times that they didn't mention another hotfix in between. I'm hoping that that means that patch 1 will literally be the next thing. Of course, time will tell. What will be in it, we don't yet know, outside of that report that it's going to be quite gigantic. We expect it to kind of be an overgrown hotfix, judging by what they're saying. However, let's focus in also on patch 2. A reminder, of course, as per the X thing, C, it just doesn't work. C is patch 2, so it's that third step in the process. We don't really know too much specifically about this, other than, of course, they say that they'll be incorporating some requests in the latter. That's patch number 2. It was recently reported that Baldur's Gate 3 may let us change the way that we look in future. This was again after an interaction between the development team and someone on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. Someone said, quote, "Sir, please let me change how I look in the game. I'm begging," in all capitals, with lots of exclamation marks afterwards, and they got a reply, "Things are being cooked." So that's about all that we know, and there's sort of other speculation and requests like that popping up on the platform formerly known as Twitter all the time. But it is also important here that I temper expectations just a little bit, because it's also widely known and reported that they're largely focusing on the launch of the PS5 version at the moment, which is of course coming up quite soon. They were quoted earlier in August saying that currently, quote, "all the focus," end quote, is on PC and PS5 versions of Baldur's Gate 3. So we should expect, at least in the short term, while the PS5 version is still coming out, that will be the focus. By the way, they also there talk about Xbox, and of course this kind of links us through nicely into my final point about console. Now, in terms of the PS5's release, because that is the most imminent, here you can see the times. If you've got the digital deluxe edition, you will actually get 3 days early access this time, so that might be worth pursuing. Unlike it was on PC, because of course the PC launch was brought forward to avoid competition with Bethesda's upcoming RPG. And as far as Xbox versions go, probably unlikely due to holdups with the inferior Series S version. We're not sure, but we expect an update before the end of the year. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you next time.